So time to start today's session on the radar template. Let me start presenting and sharing my screen. Just allow me a few moments to allocate the different windows to different parts of the screen. Perfect. I trust that you can see everything okay. Again, if not, do reach out by unmuting or through the chat. So, radar charts 101. Today, we will be going through our radar charts. And today's agenda will mainly be focusing on a good and chunky introduction to the radar chart template in order to be able to focus when it's best to use it, what are the do's and what are the don'ts of a radar chart, and also what are the strong suits of a radar chart and what are not. Of course, we will be walking you through different types of radar charts by looking at the different starting points that we have here at Flourish and exploring their different options. And of course, it's a webinar and it's a hands-on webinar. So we'll be creating our own radar chart as a demonstration of how you can create one from scratch. And then we'll be showing different useful functionalities of this template through different examples that we have already created either on our blogspot or on our help docs and so on. So let's get started, everybody, by introducing the template. And as I said before, use the chat for any questions that you might have. So radar charts, what are these? You have noticed that they look kind of radars, you know, like the kind of radars that you might see in a film, but they're also really useful for comparing and visualizing data that have a lot and multiple variables. And with this kind of chart, with a radar chart, you can plot one or more values over multiple common variables, which is not very easy to do in general, by giving each of these values an axis and also an axis for each variable arranged in a radial around a central point. And radar charts can be you can encounter them by different names such as spider charts, polar charts, web charts, or star plots sometimes. And as you can see in this radar chart, we have multiple variables that are visualized at the same time on a chart around a central point, which is usually our value point. Let's move on by mentioning some advantages and disadvantages that this type of chart features in order to have these in mind if and they usually function as a good way to make out if your data are good for a radar chart or not. Some of the strong suits of this type of chart is that as we mentioned already, you can plot and compare multiple data and variables at the same time. And it's a great template choice for comparing between multiple data points, since it can feature a lot of data points and visualize them at the same time. And it's also extremely useful for measuring performance data. So that's why in a lot of sports-related content, such as football video games or basketball performances, you can see quite often radar charts measuring the performance of the various athletes. And also they offer a simple way to compare a single piece of data that includes groups of information, especially with our grid of radar option that we will be going through later while we will be creating our own example. So, there's unfortunately there's some disadvantages as well. As we mentioned, it's very good for visualizing multiple data and variables, but that's also kind of a pain point sometimes, because if you have a lot of variables plotted there, the charts can become quite crowded and a bit confusing to read and make out trends and generally read it. So it will be good to keep in mind not to overdo it. And also it can be difficult to find a data scale that fits all ranges of the values. It's not uncommon for the values to have widely divergent scales. And that's something that we must always keep in mind if we want to visualize our data with a radar chart, in order not to essentially mislead the reader, since the scales of the different radar charts would be vastly different. So we must somehow account for that. Also, it's not very effective for comparing vastly different and vastly distinct entities. You should think of this chart as a big picture chart and big trends chart, not for focusing on the minutiae of different, not on the minutiae of your data. Small differences are not always easy to be visualized with a radar chart. And also, connected with our previous point, it can oversimplify values and provide misleading conclusions. So it would be good to keep in mind that it's a type of visualization that it's not an accident that it's called sometimes a star plot. It's for big and for large amounts and large scales in general, not for very small individual differences between data points and values. So now that we have a good foundation of what this type of chart is and when it's good to visualize our data with this template and when it's not, it would be good to walk you through the different starting points that we offer on our template chooser in order to be able to tell yourselves what's the best starting point and what are the differences, best according to your needs, the one that you should be using, and what are the differences between them. Let's start by the polar chart. That can be very similar to pie charts, except that each segment has the same angle with the radius of the segment differing depending on the value. So let's head over to our template chooser. And create new visualization. Head down to the different radar chart starting points. As we can see in this polar chart with time slider, our starting point is visualizing the levels of CIs since 1979, I think. Yeah. Kind of a niche use case, but since there's some demand for it, it would be good to have it in mind. Continuing, we have a radar with filter, and this starting point is a regular, a normal chart, but with controls that allow users to filter between different categories. As we can see, again, on our template chooser, we head back and pick a radar with filter. We have visualized different Ed Sheeran songs, I think these are, and different songs in general. Apologies for my lack of this particular pop music knowledge. And we have a control option that we can switch between different music genres and accordingly focus on its category. These are definitely not Ed Sheeran songs, obviously. Continuing with our starting points, we have a stellar chart on offer as well, which is an elegant alternative to a radar chart, where the chart always is being shaped like a star, no matter how many variables, and it looks quite cool. Quite an elegant way of visualizing the same data as before. So now it's time to stop just watching, but actually making a radar chart and demonstrating how the different functionalities, and especially those that we mentioned in our starting points, actually work in an example. We have collated some data about the Marvel Cinematic Universe of Avengers from a blog. There are different superheroes. Let me increase the column width here. We have different superheroes and data about various of their characteristics and strengths, like power, strength, and outfit and leadership. So we have this data that we will be downloading as a CSV file. This is now done. Perfect. Let me get this slightly out of our way. So we have downloaded our data. We are on our radar chart starting points. We don't need a polar chart in this particular case, obviously. So let's start with a radar with filter for a start and edit it accordingly. Let's head over to our data sheet. We need to replace our old data with our new data. So upload data file is already selected, so we can replace our data. by the ones that the CSV file contains. And now I want you to demonstrate to you a new feature and a new way that our data set thinks about data. We call it data magic. Essentially, we have incorporated and launched in the radar template and on the table template a new way that Flourish can essentially recognize what kind of data the user uploads and assign the relevant columns to the proper data bindings. For example, if you upload data that contain a column containing dates, Flourish can now understand that, hey, this column is dates, so better to assign this column either to the time or to the label data binding. So that's why we have now this new settings prompt, and we can select or deselect that we want Flourish to interpret the data type of each column and assign them accordingly automatically. As we can see, it recognized that these are not numeric values. These are strings, and probably they are our labels, which is and our names, which are our superheroes. Let's remove color categories since we don't have different categories in this case, and see what we have already. Let me increase the width. We have different radars containing, presenting data about the leadership ranking and the outfit ranking and the powers and strength of different superheroes. We can opt for two shape options, either curved radars or straight, and switch between the star-shaped radar that we demonstrated before and ring ones. We need to, basically don't need, but it would be preferable to assign them individual colors in order to make the chart a bit more legible, which I have already here. We will be using custom color overrides. And another useful feature that I would like to demonstrate is comparison lines. So if we opt for the combined option, it makes our radar charts look a bit cluttered, but also it offers a way to compare how each individual data point, in this case superhero, compares to all the others. Let me demonstrate what I mean by that. As we can see now, we can enable show comparison lines in grid mode, and we can understand now where each of our individual data points sits in the general ranking of all of our data, essentially. Also, we can combine our radar charts, and this way you can essentially create a multi-radar chart and immediately be able to more easily compare all of your data. And speaking of a grid of charts that we mentioned before, we have different settings about about the margin of the charts and the number of columns that would be available in a grid of radar charts. In this case, we leave it on auto. In this particular example, we do not have different categories about the different value attributes, but another useful feature would be outer labels, which allow you to group the different metrics of the radial and can assist your audience in understanding the data quicker. We will be demonstrating this feature in one of the examples that are coming right up. And also, as with all of our templates, if you want to dive deeper into your data and offer further context for your audience, you can add pop-ups and panels featuring everything from text to images to videos or even other charts that is useful for further enhancing your narrative. Let's finish our example here. As we can see, we have controls that we can use for a combined view that we already mentioned of all of our radars, or separating them. And in case you want to translate or change the copy of these two control buttons, you can do that through the controls options and style them accordingly. Set the animation duration and also prettify a bit your pop-ups and panels. In this case, we will be decreasing the decimal places of our metrics. Head over to pop-ups and panels, enable show pop-up styles, and give our pop-ups a bit more width in order to be able to feature all of the metrics without having to for the metrics to go to a new line and create a line break. We have a number of useful examples. One about Ed Sheeran music that features different useful features that I mentioned before. Let's see some statistics about Ed Sheeran songs. This particular example features panels, which are perfect for incorporating a large amount of information, especially textual information. As we can see here, we have different metrics styled and also MP3 files that are embedded. We have another example about dog breeds that features that, as we can see, it's kind of crowded because it takes up all of my screen, and it's quite a big screen. As we can see, we have different metrics about different dog breeds, such as grooming and costs and longevity and ailments. And if we click on a radar, we get a number of different data, and in this panel, another visualization. So we can see that you don't just have to have a radar chart. You can start from a radar chart, but enhance your story and dive deeper into your data using our pop-ups and panels feature. And as I mentioned again before, quite useful for sports-related content. In this example, we have the top 25 players according to the FIFA 2020 game, according and separated based on country. As we can see, we have different categories that we can choose from. And also controls that allow us to filter based on clubs or individuals. So this concludes our journey on the radar chart template. Apologies for very slightly overrunning there. In conclusion, it's very useful template for comparing large numbers, data that feature quite a lot of variables, and it's perfect for this this use case, but it's also its small drawback. So we must every time think if we are overdoing it and we created a very cluttered radar chart. But it's usually quite a fancy way for presenting metrics and being able to compare in the larger scheme of things different values. We have a number of resources available for you. In these slides, we will be on our resources page tomorrow, so you will be able to find everything. We have our help docs of the radar chart offering an overview, and another help doc that guides you through how to color your charts by category and how to add custom content in your pop-ups and panels, as we already saw in our examples. If you have any questions, please do reach out to hello@flourish.studio, and we will be glad and we will be doing our best to answer those. Was very lovely not seeing you, but having you attend this webinar. I hope you found it useful, and it was certainly fun for me. I wish you a good evening, morning, whatever, depending on your time zone. And thank you for attending again. Ciao.